Okay. So greetings everybody and welcome to another Eye on Africa. I am Awasar, Assistant Director for Academic Affairs at the African Studies Center, Michigan State University. And Eye on Africa is our weekly seminary series. So every Thursday, we invite a scholar of Africa somebody that does their research on Africa to come and share with us. And today's lecture was put together in collaboration with Dr. Nicole Mason-Waddell, who is Associate Professor in the Department of Agriculture, Food and Resource Economics at Michigan State University. She's also Associate Chairperson and Graduate Program Director in the Agriculture, Food and Resource Economic Department. So we're very grateful, and I want to take this opportunity to remind all the core faculty of the African Studies Center that if they want to invite somebody, they can just go to our website, Eye on Africa, and there is a form there that they can fill to invite a guest. We always welcome that and hope that the core faculty will take advantage of that. So thank you so much, Nicole, for helping us bring this talk together. We're very grateful to you and to also John. So I'm gonna let you introduce our guest.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Awa, and I also want to extend my welcome to everyone to the second Eye on Africa seminar of the semester. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Johanne Pelletier. Dr. Pelletier is a quantitative ecologist and environmental scientist with expertise in remote sensing, and she works on impact evaluation for the CGIAR Standing Panel on Impact Assessment. Her research focuses on understanding the impacts of human interactions with terrestrial ecosystems through land use and cover change, with the goal of mitigating climate change, sustaining ecosystem services, and improving livelihoods. Dr. Pelletier earned her PhD at McGill University in Canada, as well as with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute in Panama. She played a leadership role on a NASA-funded project focusing on improving estimates of carbon emissions and removals from land cover change in Southern and Eastern Africa. And this was while she was a postdoctoral fellow at the Woodland Climate Research Center. She was also selected for a highly competitive NatureNet fellowship by the Nature Conservancy at Cornell University. And during that experience, she worked with agricultural and development economists, studying the relationship between deforestation and the use of agricultural inputs by smallholder farmers. And that's actually how Johanne and I connected initially. More recently, she's led a collaborative partnership project of the Nature Conservancy Cornell-Atkinson Sustainability Center to create new soil maps for Zambia, to estimate land-based climate change mitigation potential, and to monitor charcoal production with remote sensing. So you can see that she has a very extensive and really well-established background, high-profile work, and really important, impactful work. Today she'll be presenting on the contribution of forests and the challenges to address deforestation, looking at the case of Zambia. So welcome everyone, and welcome once again to you, Johanne, and we look forward to your seminar. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity and for inviting me. And I want to thank Awasa and Nicole McKenzie also for helping organizing the event. So I will just start sharing my presentation, the presentation I have for you. So for me, it's a good opportunity to be with you because I feel there's a lot of overlap between interests of researchers at Michigan State University. And I think it's a good opportunity for me to discuss about my research and possibly find collaborators in the future. So, so today I will really focus on forests, which is kind of my long-term research interest, and especially the challenge to address deforestation. And I will focus on my work in Zambia. So it's a compilation of different work that has been going on for about 5 years, I would say. And so I attempt to present a bit of an overview of findings. And I want to also thank all the co-authors that have contributed to this work. So to give you an overview of what I will be talking about today, I will talk about the role of forest and the extent of deforestation globally. And what I want to do with this is to just point out to new research that have come up recently in recent years about the role of forests and what they do for human well-being in terms of ecosystem services and also products. So most of the research I will talk about, or the evidence or the case I'm talking about, is related to Zambia. Zambia is a country that is involved in trying to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. So there's policies in place to try to reduce deforestation, and also it's part of their national determined contribution for the country to the Paris Climate Agreement. So I will talk about some of the evidence or glimpse of solution that we were able to find with Nikki and other collaborators in the agricultural sector, especially focused on smallholder farmers, and also tell you about the evidence that have been gathering with colleagues on the charcoal sector and its impact on deforestation also. So just a quick reminder about the distribution of forests. This is quite a recent map that comes from the Global Forest Resource Assessment that is produced every 5 years. So in 2020, this is pretty much the distribution of forests. The largest part is located in the tropics. In forests, they occupy about 1/3 of the land area of the planet. And they really play a fundamental role in the biogeochemical cycle. And so they play important role for us also in terms of ecosystem services. So when we look at deforestation, some regions are more concerning than others, especially in South America, in Africa. There's also a lot of deforestation in Asia, but because there's also forest regrowth in some areas, especially China, in reforestation, it balances out, but there's still deforestation, especially in Indonesia, in Southeast Asia. So what we can notice from that chart is that while South America has managed to reduce a bit of deforestation, in Africa, it's been increasing. So these global average, they don't show all of the information, definitely, of what is happening on the ground. And so a lot of, when we track deforestation from 2001 to 2015, globally, there had been no real reduction because a lot of deforestation was just displaced from Latin America to the Southeast Asian region. And a lot in these areas, the deforestation is mostly driven by commodity production. And this is in contrast to the case of the African continent, where about 92% of deforestation is attributed to what they call here shifting cultivation, but would be more associated to smallholder farmer expansion. So why forest and woodland are important? So I want to go back to that because it's quite fundamental to be able to know what would happen if we deforest and what they are doing actually in the landscape. So one of the important thing that forest does for us, it's really this two-way contribution to climate change. So first of all, forests that are existing, that are intact or that are regrowing are a major sink, carbon sink. So these forests pull out carbon from the atmosphere and stock it in their biomass. On the contrary, when there is land use change and deforestation, all the carbon that is stuck in the trees. So if you consider a tree, about half of its weight is carbon. So when it's cut down and it's burned, so which often happen in the tropics, all this carbon is released to the atmosphere and then contribute to climate change. So as we can see, land use change on this graph is pretty stable over time, while the use of the increase in atmospheric CO2 is really driven by our use of fossil fuel. So when I say that forests play a crucial role in the biogeochemical cycle, it's because when there's no forest, we've noticed that the temperature is warmer and drier. On the contrary, the trees with their high evapotranspiration keep the area more cool and more wet, so there's more moisture in the air. So it's evaluated that about like one tropical tree played the role of about 2 domestic air conditioning machine in terms of per day role and cooling. So it's a very important role. Trees have generally deeper roots, especially in our area of interest in Zambia. They have very deep roots. They access water deeper in the ground and contribute to this water cycling. So just to give you example of research that show what's the percentage of precipitation that is regulated by the vegetation that is upwind and contributes to the precipitation downwind. So it's a large percentage. For example, if we concentrate on Africa, it's a high percentage of the precipitation that come from vegetation that in upwind that deliver precipitation downwind. Other recent research showed the importance of forests in terms of maintaining cooler temperature. So they looked at satellite observation of temperature between forested and deforested area, and they were able to show that in deforested area, the temperature, so we look at the curve, the green is when there's the forest cover, the orange is when it's cleared and the temperature is similar to a century of climate change under the worst case scenario. So what it means is that it has an impact on the temperature that's felt on the ground, and therefore the temperature for agriculture. So agriculture depends on precipitation and is affected by higher temperature. So definitely keeping forests is important for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So it's a very important role, especially in places where the economy is more reliant on agriculture in rain-fed agriculture. So it is evaluated that for people that live in extreme poverty, over 90% are dependent on forests for some part of their livelihood. So being gathering wood fuel or supply in terms of food that comes from the forest. So it's an important part of the poorest people's livelihood and this is important to keep that in mind. In Africa, it's very important in terms of product because it's critical in the energy sector. And so here we see the map, the percentage of the population that depends on solid fuels. And so I will talk more about this a bit later in the talk and how it's unfolding, especially in the case study area. So now I will jump to our Zambian context. So what are the forest conditions right now in Zambia? So Zambia is located in the Southern Africa region, and it's covered about by 60% by forest. Most of it is Miombo woodland. So we find both wet Miombo, which is usually more diverse in higher tree diversity, and is found at higher precipitation. And the dry Miombo that's found more in the south and Mopani woodland. So the area in the Miombo woodland is about 70% of the forest area. So you have other like deciduous wet forest and the dry deciduous forest more in the western area. So deforestation in Zambia is important because it's one of the highest rates in Africa. There's a lot of uncertainty related to these estimates, but what we can see over time is an increase in deforestation. So in this sense, the threat or the pressure on forest ecosystem is increasing. What we can see, what I found also from previous work, and let me walk you through a bit of this slide because I know it's complicated, but Zambia has a set of national inventory that they have performed. So measure forest plots that they've laid out in the country when they went and measured the vegetation, and they did 2 of those and revisited the same area to measure the change. So with some of my work, I went and measured the change using the data from the Zambia Forestry Department and analyze the biomass change at the plot level. So this allows for area, the forest, remaining forest, so forests that they don't experience land use change or are not deforested. What is the rate of sequestration, carbon sequestration? And so I created 4 sensitivity scenarios on this growth rate, with some being very conservative, so eliminating all the upper tail of the growth rate. And so in red is the absorption, carbon absorption, that's usually represented as a negative number. So it's from the view of the atmosphere. And emissions from deforestation from the period I told you, from 2000 to 2010 and 2010 to 2014. And for the whole period overall, it's all consistent with a large sink from Zambian forests and woodland. So we hear less about this story, but I think it's important to point out that at right now, or based on this data, this analysis, the forest of Zambia is still an important carbon sink. So I talked about deforestation, and so it's important to be able to consider what are the tools, the policy tools that can be implemented by policymakers to address or reduce deforestation and conserve forests and the ecosystem services that they provide. So unfortunately, policymakers, they don't have access to a lot of strong evidence-based research. And that's what Nikki Ambulo Noma and Chris Barrett try to address. So with that research, we try to use information from Zambia that especially for maize. So the question was, does smallholder maize intensification reduce deforestation? So in Zambia, a lot of the land area is dedicated to maize, which is a staple crop, and mostly smallholder farmers are dedicated to this cultivation. And the government has implemented some subsidy program to provide smallholder farmer with inorganic fertilizer and improve maize seeds to reduce poverty and increase productivity for smallholder farmers. So we went and tried to use this information to see what's the impact of this maize intensification on deforestation. So the need for evidence is empirical evidence is very clear, because at the theoretical level, we don't have much. It's very contested. So we have the Borlaug hypothesis, which says that as yield increase, crop price should decline, and this should have a land sparing effect. But there's also the Johanne hypothesis, which says that as income from higher yield are increasing, it will increase the incentive to deforest and expand agriculture. So because we don't have more guidance at the theoretical level, we attempt to use this information to evaluate it empirically. So our methodological approach, we use a method called small area estimation, which is used a lot to gain poverty estimates at a more disaggregated level. So we use this methodology that relied on the Rural Agricultural Livelihood Survey for Zambia. So in green, you can see the wards where the survey was applied. Ward is the lowest administrative level in Zambia. And we use the population census for 2010. And so we identify what are the covariates from these two, from the surveys and census that are the same or matching, that we could match together. Then we use those matching covariates and we built a model using those covariates as independent variable in the information from the rural the RALS, Rural Agricultural Livelihood Survey, that provides information on inorganic fertilizer and improved maize seed application rate. So that's our variables of interest. So two models for each. So we rely on random forest machine learning application, and we replace in the model the independent variable by the covariates from the census, and we predict inorganic fertilizer and improved maize seed for all the wards in the country. So the application rate, average application rate for the ward. So with this information, we build models, and we use the deforestation or forest cover loss that is provided by INSEN data at University of Maryland. So it's annual forest cover loss at a 30-meter resolution that we use as a dependent variable trying to understand what's the role of inorganic fertilizer and improved seed, correcting for a lot of covariates, or especially, for example, the forest cover at the ward level, soil characteristic, proximity to road, and many things that could influence this relationship. So we built a model for forest cover loss of 2011. And what we found for our model, which include 1,420 wards, so and cover the whole country, we find that there's a negative association between maize improved seeds and forest cover loss. So if there's a higher application rate of improved seed, there's less deforestation. We find a small, weaker, positive relationship between the application of fertilizer on maize and forest cover loss. Two also variable I want to point out to you is two variables that are related to soil characteristic, which was surprising in this this analysis. So especially in terms of soil pH and soil carbon density. So I will talk a little bit, but both of this, so higher soil pH, so less acid, and higher organic matter is associated with less deforestation. So one of the variables of interest, as I was mentioning, is pH. So there's been a prior research that was relating pH and the use of fertilizer. And so maize grows better when it's between a pH of 5.5 and 7. So when the pH is more acid, it will have a negative effect on the growth and productivity of maize, and also to its response to fertilizer. So we went ahead and separated the country into zones of low pH using the threshold that is in the literature for maize, so the kind of critical pH, and pH higher than 5.5. And so the interesting result was that at lower pH, fertilizer improved seed, or the interaction had no significant relationship with deforestation. On the other hand, at a more regular, more neutral pH, these relationship where we found again a positive association between the application rate of fertilizer and forest cover loss, a strong negative association between the use of maize improved seed and forest cover loss, and the interaction also as a dampening effect or really association with deforestation. So we went and looked at what's also the relation with yields. So we found a significant difference in maize yield also between low and high pH. So in the zone where we have a low pH, the maize production or yield is significantly lower than at a more neutral pH. So this shows that it is simplified that the role of soil is important in that the production or the productivity of agriculture is related to being able to conserve forests or not. So we tested some scenarios So we used what we had in terms of application rate to make a kind of average scenario in terms of what's the forest cover loss per ward. And then we tested, okay, what would happen if all farmers use the recommended application rate for inorganic fertilizer and for improved seed. And we find that it would lower the deforestation or forest cover loss. And on the contrary, if farmers would not use input, we see a double of deforestation overall. So our finding, just to wrap up a little bit on our finding for this work. So we found that agricultural intensification by smallholder farmers exhibit a land sparing effect, which is positive because it means that there is some win-win synergy between reducing food insecurity and reducing deforestation. We also found that the main driver as that was the use of improved seed by smallholder farmer, which is strongly associated with lower deforestation. We found that without using inputs, we could have expected much higher deforestation. So they are already playing a role in conserving forest, and that adopting recommended improved seed application rates, we could further reduce forest clearing. So it would also contribute probably to higher yield ultimately. So improved seed and soil health are key to sustainable intensification. So when we talk about sustainable intensification, there's always a landscape characteristic, and maintaining forest cover is part of that, for the reason also that I mentioned earlier in terms of water cycling, temperature, and definitely soil health, as we see that soil pH and soil organic matter or soil organic carbon in that are present have a high importance for in terms of mediating variables or like key variables for reducing deforestation. So definitely, like in Zambia, there's been more one-size-fits-all recommendation for inputs, and definitely improving the information that farmer can have in tailoring recommendation to their condition, agroecological conditions, could be a very smart way to sustainably intensify agriculture that would be better for both forest conservation and agricultural productivity. So some work that we've advanced is using all the plots that I mentioned before, where the Zambia Forestry Department went and measured the forest cover. They also took soil samples. And so Zambia is one country where like there's not that much broad information or samples that are available for having precise soil map. So we try to fulfill this gap. And so with collaborators, we analyze these soil samples collected by the Zambia Forestry Department, and we created these new maps that could be used in the future to improve recommendation for farmers. And so in terms of soil organic carbon, and orient what approach could be used for improving agricultural productivity in a way that can also benefit soil health and also mitigate climate change. So now I'm going to switch to the energy sector, which is a more informal sector. And definitely agriculture play a major role. Often energy is less well accounted for, especially because it's more informal, and it's also unmonitored generally. So trying to understand what's its role of especially charcoal production and deforestation is important for the government and for developing policy that can really take into account its role in the way to move toward sustainable energy transition. So if we look at Africa in general, just bringing us up to a more bigger picture. So in terms of electrification, there's been a lot of progress recently, but still compared to other continents, Africa seems like the right place to go to bed at night because it seems very quiet or less lit, but it shows that a lot of people don't have access to electricity yet. But even with electricity access, often the energy that is used for cooking rely on wood energy. So this is a graph from the International Energy Agency from their data for Africa, and we see that the largest share of the energy supply comes from with the category biofuel and waste, which is mostly like wood energy, in fact. So people may have electricity in the cities for light or for refrigerator, but often it's too expensive to cook with, or the perception or the reality is too expensive for many people to cook with electricity. So for people that are unfamiliar with charcoal production, well, charcoal is produced in rural area where there's forest. So trees are cut down in an area and stacked to make a kiln, so covered with soil. Here the kiln is not so great. It's not supposed to smoke that much. So there's some holes. But then when it's done, the kiln is undone and the charcoal is extracted and is shipped to the city in bags, and it's bagged in truck. It's going toward the city for use. So it's cleaner than wood, it's less bulky, it has many benefits that compared to other fuel. But definitely there's some worry about the sustainability of the practice. So it's just bringing you to the national strategy of Zambia, where two objectives are related to regulating the charcoal production and also adopting alternative energy sources. So the problem, as I said before, is that the impacts of charcoal are still unmonitored and unquantified, so it's very hard to assess if it's sustainable. So one important thing to consider or to understand is how charcoal is produced. So if charcoal is produced when land is converted to agriculture, so when land is converted in agriculture, it could, the wood that's cut, the trees that are cut down, they could be burnt on site, which often happens, or it could be, the wood could be used to make charcoal. So in this case, it means that agriculture is the main driver, and there's no additional emission from producing charcoal. The impact comes from agricultural expansion. On the other hand, if It's mostly clear for energy. Then there's a direct impact of charcoal production on the forest. So if charcoal is a main product that people take. So it's important to develop policies that can work at conserving forests and addressing deforestation. We need to be able to know that what's the main ultimate driver, because if we think that we can solve the problem just with energy, but actually the problem comes from agriculture, we will miss the target. So to gather more data on charcoal production, I went with a team of people, 4 people, some with that were also working with the forestry department. And we established a study area near the Kafue National Park. So we did field inventory in customary land, private land, and forest, state land, including game management area and forest reserves. So an area of about 425,000 hectares, and we also interview charcoal producers. So just to show you a little bit the context. So here we're looking at a Sentinel-2 image, like 2 Sentinel-2, one for May 2018 and then May 2019. And Sentinel-2 is a satellite imagery that has a 10-meter spatial resolution. So we can see in blue all the control zone, and in red are the zones that are impacted. So it's very much of a mix of charcoal production with agriculture. So it's difficult, it's a challenge to be able to detect charcoal production in this complex agricultural charcoal landscape. So it's a challenge. So one of the important findings we had is that the impact in the type of driver differ by land tenure. So between customary land, private land, and state land. So what we found is that in an agricultural land, the main driver of forest clearing is agriculture, clearly on customary and private land, and charcoal is made as a byproduct. So people need a field, and they will have people come to produce because it's help clearing out the trees, and people that produce charcoal, they find their benefit, and the landowner find their benefit. So for example, in customary land, especially in farm block, that's where we identified the largest kilns we found. On the other hand, we can see that statistically, there's a dependence relationship between the land tenure type, and we see that on state land or forest reserve mostly, charcoal is produced as the main driver. So in forest reserve, forest is available, but because of agriculture takes more time, it's more risky. People come, produce charcoal for 2 weeks and leave. There's people we met people from outside the area, people from nearby, like nearby community, but people coming from Lusaka to produce. So here again, just to show you in 1 year, this is inside the forest reserve. So just to show you here, so this is the road is the limit. So, and this other side is outside the forest reserve. So it's really agricultural. So in this area is supposed to be a forest that's protected, but we can see that all this charcoal production is eating the forest slowly. But yeah, so it's progressing. In 1 year, there's a lot of kilns that are made. So by visiting the sites and contrasting them by land tenure, we were able to see that before charcoaling, there's more biomass on state land and customary land than on private land. Overall, when charcoal is performed, the loss of biomass is pretty much the same, but the remaining information, like the remaining biomass, is different with a higher biomass remaining on state land. So also in terms of area of impact, we find bigger area of impact on customary land. So that's also where we found the largest kiln, and on state land also larger kiln. The larger impact area, sorry. So the area of impact on average is half an hectare, the largest size 2 hectares. So we were able to track the area of impact with the GPS. So we have quite precise information about that. And just to point out that the impact is not just limited to what is extracted, but there's also on site a lot of fuel load that remains, so there's a more susceptibility to fire on the sites, which can like degrade more. In terms of biodiversity or tree diversity, there's less diversity in private land tenure compared to customary or state land. So here is like the trees that were extracted for charcoal. That's all of them are very typical Miombo species. What we notice also, and that's different from different area of the Miombo woodland, is that the selection was not very selective. So it was a lot of most of the area were clear cut, and so you had more selective clearing on customary land and less selective clearing on private land. A lot of private land were really just all cleared out in most like the range of dBH, so were extracted. So this is very different from experience in Mopanis or woodland where just the Mopani is extracted. And so here most of the species, so it has a differential impact. So just to compare, it's just a small example that that we gather from in terms of incentive for people to produce charcoal. So this is an example from my friend Humphrey, who has a 3 hectare maize cultivation, and we sat together and calculated all of his costs, and depending on what the price of the maize bag, it is net benefit. And then we looked at a kind of average production for a charcoal producer. And because the costs are much less to produce and the price is very good, often they can make higher, the incentive, like the economic incentive is good, you know, is high. So the work that is going on now is to in monitoring charcoal is to, so the zone of charcoal production have been identified using Sentinel-2 image. So especially for a period just after to the rainy season, beginning of the dry season. And so the potential is very good. The approach that was the most successful was to use segmentation. And so one thing to that remains to be done in the detection of in monitoring of charcoal is to be able to detect the kilns, which will be the the best indicator for us for attribution. So here you see on planet scope data, you can see the kiln, so the black, the charcoal, and the center, the disturb land. So this is true color image, false color image, and different vision enhancement, image enhancement. And so you can see the kiln, but yes. So with detecting the kiln, we can for sure identify what area were used to produce charcoal before it becomes not visible. So just to wrap up a little bit what we found from this work. So we see impact on carbon stocks, on biomass and tree diversity, and it's different for different land tenure type. Charcoal is mostly a byproduct of agricultural expansion on customary land and private land, but it is a cause of degradation in forest reserve, so state land. So Sentinel-2 imagery is very promising for monitoring charcoal. So there's still so as I said, there's this challenge because of the complex agricultural charcoal landscape, but it's very promising. And definitely what we find from the extraction and the pace of the extraction is that there's a threat to sustainable energy production from charcoal and to forest conservation. So just to synthesize a bit the overview of this presentation. So I want to reiterate that forests and woodlands, they contribute significantly to human well-being in different ways in terms of ecosystem services and products that come from the forest that can be difficult to replace. There's a crucial role of forests in adapting and mitigating climate change. So because of the relation with the water cycle, with temperature, but also the role of forests as this two-way source or sink, depending on how we manage them. So with the team and with some work, we were able to gather some evidence, some line of direction that could help in the agricultural sector to address some deforestation, but definitely more work needs to be done at this level, and especially to build the evidence that can orient policy. So in the charcoal level, what I presented is really gathering information that can inform, that can serve as input for policy, trying to really quantify the issue and the role of energy production on deforestation. So I want to thank all these people from many of them from Zambia who help in the field or institutionally that help to make this work possible and provide generously all the data for this work in terms of forest inventory. So a lot of the data was collected from the Zambia Forestry Department and so our other contributor. So thank you, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you very much, Johanne, for a very important, interesting, and important topic. And I think we have questions. I'm gonna start reading. So Jamie Monson asked, thank you, Johanne, for a very informative presentation. Sometimes smallholder farmers in Africa are blamed for environmental degradation and displaced to make way for larger scale agricultural schemes. Do you think your research will have an impact in this area?
Yeah, thank you for this question. This is very important because in the study, that we've done, we didn't address large scale producers or small, like we focus on producer that cultivate less than 20 hectares of land. And there's also process of bigger farmers that, but very little data. And I think it's a very important question because often, you know, so farmers, when the land is not fertile anymore, or the family is growing or for other reason, they will need to expand the land to produce or keep the productivity. But it's often like smaller. So this has been quantified by my collaborator, Hambulo Noma, with, that did important work on this. But definitely we're lacking information related to larger farmers and one aspect that is preoccupying is I was looking at change in some buffer zone of the Kafue National Park, and there is a lot of deforestation associated to tobacco farming. And so this is not very much explored. And I think we need to build the data to be able to evaluate what's the contribution. So we always like work with the data that's available. And also in terms of interest, I think the idea is not to blame smallholder farmer, is to try to find solution to food insecurity and reducing also deforestation, because larger farmers, they are more able to, if it's getting more dry, or they can adopt like more easily irrigated agriculture. They have more means to adapt, while smallholder farmer have less means to adapt if, like, you know, lots of deforestation reduce rainfall, for example. So there's more vulnerability.
Thank you. And somebody asked, it is interesting that the use of modern inputs affects deforestation. I would like to know a little bit more, I guess, about which challenges remain in the access to modern inputs in Zambia, and which strategies will be required to promote the use of modern inputs as a policy response.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think there's been changes, like initially in the program, there was mostly like recommendation of how much to use. And Nicole Mason has done more research on the changes that have come after with the change in subsidy program. But one point that is important is that subsidy program don't reach all of the farmer, or don't provide for the whole farm. It's a contribution, but farmer needs to buy input. So definitely, if there's a private sector availability for farmers that is accessible where they are, it's helping. But I think what I take as a lesson, or as something that would benefit farmer, is to really understand better, or have better recommendation in extension services, to understand what can work in their area, which varies a lot. You know, we found in some area of the country, you know, farmer, they have acid soil. So like there's approach that can be used to help them produce better and like more sustainably and more. So I think more targeted information would really help farmers at this level, and that could also, by extension, have like reduce the need to deforest.
Thank you. So another question here. Thank you for your insightful presentation. Why is a lot of your focus on Zambia?
I started working in Zambia under this NASA project related to estimation of carbon emission and conservation in Eastern Southern Africa. And we established a good connection with the Zambia Forestry Department. So it really unfolded this way from the collaboration with the Zambia Forestry Department and accessing, like they made data accessible. So they provided the data set that they have and then asked me again to work on the second data set when they were done with the second forest inventory. So it's been really kind of ongoing work. Or what is the need? What is the information? What could we do that could support the work that's being done? So that's been unfolding like this. Zambia is a great country too.
I'm sure John Metzler will agree. Hi, John. One question. So Lo Zulu is asking, how do you explain the positive association between inorganic fertilizer use and forest loss? And so another question here that maybe you can combine them. The comparison of charcoal and agricultural production is very interesting and would be important to inform policy, perhaps to promote sustainable charcoal production. The analysis appears to be a snapshot. Does it include the sustainable production of charcoal? If commercial charcoal production is promoted, how much land would be needed to promote sustainable charcoal production?
Okay, all great question. I'll start with Dr. Zulu's question. We had a lot of question about this, but definitely I don't have the clear established answer. It's really based on interpretation and hypothesis that can explain this result. And if Nikki, you would want to add something, please join me. But our interpretation of this is that in some area, so we find this we find this positive association of inorganic fertilizer and forest cover loss globally, but more specifically when we separate, we find it in area where the pH is more neutral. So our thinking of that was manifold. So we had many possibilities. One of them is because of the low soil organic matter, putting inputs soil organic, inorganic fertilizer, you don't have the boost that you can expect often, because inorganic fertilizer are created to be effective in soil that are more fertile generally and have higher level of organic matter. And so that's one possible solution. Also, the price of fertilizer is much higher than the price of improved seed. So it's a possibility that if, for example, farmer invest in inorganic fertilizer and that they don't get the yield gain from putting this investment, that this could be an incentive to clear more. So yeah, there's still their answer is definitely would be in the soil and the effect of fertilizer. But yeah, we couldn't explore it more, but hopefully we, but definitely when fertilizer is used, like the interaction of fertilizer and improved seed, then you get an effect that is like a negative, it's associated with reduced deforestation. So in terms of the other question, there's no in the area so the sustainable production of charcoal is very limited to some pilots. So there's no information. There's some studies that is done in those pilot area to look at if it can be sustainable. Historically, actually, the forestry department had more personnel, and they were able to assign and do rotational clearing that were supervised to make sure that were dedicated to charcoal production, and then so it was like managed. There was like management in forest reserve. But now it's not happening because there's not enough staff or resources. So to establish a kind of virtuous cycle of enforcement of the law that exists, there would need to be more resources involved to make sure that forest reserve are used in a more efficient way, or under a better management that is intentional, because right now it's mostly illegal use that is done. And so also there's no revenue, so coming from the production. So doesn't help to enforce and to make a system, a regulatory system that can work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pelletier. Nicole, do you have anything you want to add? We don't have any more questions.
No, I think Johanne did a great job answering the questions. One thing we talked about in the paper was sort of related to what she was saying, to the explanation of the positive association between fertilizer use and land cover, forest cover loss. So one thing to add was, because of these low soil organic matter issues, if farmers do not find fertilizer use to be profitable, like Johanne mentioned, that could kind of add financial pressure that induces them to clear more land. And some of the ways in which farmers deal with kind of declining soil fertility is by either applying more fertilizer on that land, clearing more land, or both. And so that would show up in our data as a positive correlation between fertilizer use and forest cover loss. So we did find it a bit puzzling at first too, but we think there's some explanations there. But in addition, Johanne mentioned that when these two improved inputs are used together, the inorganic fertilizer and improved maize seeds, we do see that be correlated with a reduction in forest cover loss. So that positive interaction between the two types of inputs is really critical, and they're made to work together.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Leo just had another question. Do you want to address that? Say thank you, Johanne, for the explanation to my question. Would the relationship be linked to landholder size and whether commercial or subsistence farming?
Yeah, so in terms of commercial farming, in terms of not smallholder, like higher than 20 hectares of land, this we did not address the question because we don't have the data about this, unfortunately. I'm sure there are probably some different relationship. But definitely what we thought about is that for smallholder farmer, a lot of the production that's done is for subsistence. So a good portion of what is produced is for eating. So it's not only for sale, which could modify the relationship. So that's why it's interesting to work on this staple crop and with smallholder farmers, because it talks about food production, food security, and forest. So I think there's some good synergies there, and working with farmer to improve food security and production, and also protect forests that help making the system more productive and sustainable and adaptable to climate change.
Okay, we have somebody, Abu Traore wants to talk. Abu, go ahead. Is it by mistake? You raise your hand. Okay. Leo, do you want to talk? I see people raising their hands. I don't know.
Yeah, I can say something.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So thank you very much for this talk. So it's very interesting. My colleagues and I have been looking at this I work in Malawi a lot, and there's a project funded by the AAP. We included Zambia as well, looking at biomass energy sources and trying to link them back to the environment. So I like very much your use of remote sensing analysis to try and measure and these linkages. And working in Malawi, I know that just observe, I worked in the forestry department in Malawi for a while. So you can notice just by observation that when there's a famine, forests suffer. You know, there's more deforestation happening, but you don't get a lot of empirical evidence to show it. And we did another study with USAID, but it was in the developing world. We were looking at the linkages between devolved tenure and forest cover loss. So some of the things was land tenure type as well, like in Latin America and other places where once you privatize land, deforestation tends to increase. They invest, they cut a lot more, but on customary lands, it's more complex. The dynamics there are more complex. So, and then for Malawi, what we're really interested in as well was looking at sustainable charcoal production. And so that's why I was interested with that graph where you were showing that you make more money with charcoal. But then the risk then is that, okay, then people will just move from subsistence farming and move to charcoal and think, oh, you make more money in charcoal. But then without thinking about the resource base. So there's always, if you're not producing it sustainably. So I've been interested in work looking at sustainable charcoal production and how to make it, how to attract people to actually growing wood and producing charcoal commercially and sustainably and shifting from agriculture. So those economic analysis in the long term, comparing the profitability of the tools is of big interest.
Yes, that's very interesting. Thank you for your input. I'd be interested to read more on your work on length and your type and the finding. Yeah, actually, I'm always interested because often people say that when land is privatized, it contributes more to conservation, but it's really variable.
Yeah,
it depends a lot on the context.
Yeah. That's true.
And yeah, for yeah, I think exactly as you mentioned, I think the evaluation of like short-term gain could be higher for charcoal, but your land, if you can cultivate it like through the years, you will end up making more money.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So definitely, I think, it's very, yeah, I think the resource base is important to evaluate, and also the rate, because there's big challenges coming from like there's urbanization and population growth in the cities.
Yeah.
And so this makes higher pressure on forest ecosystems.
Yeah.
Mm.
Well, that's very interesting. I'm sure, and I should be able to contact you later and learn a little more about your work. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
I'll be glad to.
Any other questions, comments? Well, so thank you so much again, Dr. Pelletier. We appreciate you coming and sharing your research. And thank
you
for coming. We'll see you next Thursday.
Well, thank you, everybody, and it was nice to present my work and to interact.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Johanne. Thank you, everybody.